Guilty. Mr. Markey. Guilty. Mr. McConnell. Not guilty. Ms. McSally. Not guilty. Mr. Menendez. Guilty. Mr. Merkley. Guilty. Mr. Moran. Not guilty. Ms. Murkowski. Not guilty. Mr. Murphy. Guilty. Mrs. Murray. Guilty. Mr. Paul.
Not guilty.
Not guilty. Mr. Perdue. Not guilty. Mr. Peters. Guilty. Mr. Portman. Not guilty. Mr. Reed. Guilty. Mr. Risch.
Not guilty.
Not guilty. Mr. Roberts. Not guilty. Mr. Romney. Not guilty. Ms. Rosen. Guilty. Mr. Rounds. Not guilty. Mr. Rubio. Not guilty. Mr. Sanders. Guilty. Mr. Sass. Not guilty. Mr. Schatz. Guilty. Mr. Schumer. Guilty. Mr. Scott of Florida. Not guilty. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Not guilty. Mrs. Shaheen. Guilty. Mr. Shelby. Not guilty. Ms. Sinema. Guilty. Ms. Smith. Guilty. Ms. Stabenow. Guilty. Mr. Sullivan. Not guilty. Mr. Tester. Guilty. Mr. Thune. Not guilty. Mr. Tillis. Not guilty. Mr. Toomey. Not guilty. Mr. Udall. Guilty. Mr. Van Hollen. Guilty. Mr. Warner. Guilty. Ms. Warren. Guilty. Mr. Whitehouse. Guilty. Mr. Wicker. Not guilty. Mr. Wyden. Guilty. Mr. Young. Not guilty.
There you go.
On this article of impeachment, 47 senators have pronounced Donald John Trump, President of the United States, guilty as charged. 53 senators have pronounced him not guilty as charged. 2/3 of the senators present not having pronounced him guilty, the Senate adjudges that respondent Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the second article of impeachment. The presiding officer directs judgment to be entered in accordance with the judgment of the Senate as follows. The Senate, having tried Donald John Trump, President of the United States, upon 2 articles of impeachment exhibited against him by the House of Representatives, and 2/3 of the senators present not having found him guilty of the charges contained therein, it is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby, acquitted of the charges in said articles.
Mr. Chief Justice,
The majority leader is recognized.
I send an order to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Ordered that the Secretary be directed to communicate to the Secretary of State as provided by Rule 23 of the Rules of Procedure and Practice in the Senate when sitting on impeachment trials, and also to the House of Representatives, the judgment of the Senate in the case of Donald John Trump, and transmit a certified copy of the judgment to each.
Without objection, the order will be entered.
Mr. Chief Justice,
The Majority Leader is recognized.
before this process fully concludes, I want to very quickly acknowledge a few of the people who helped the Senate fulfill our duty these past weeks. First and foremost, I know my colleagues join me in thanking Chief Justice Roberts for presiding over the Senate trial with a clear head, steady hand, and the forbearance that this rare occasion demands. We know full well that his presence as our presiding officer came in addition to, not instead of, his day job across the street. So the Senate thanks the Chief Justice and his staff who helped him perform this unique role. Like his predecessor, Chief Justice Rehnquist, the Senate will be awarding Chief Justice Roberts the Golden Gavel. To commemorate his time presiding over this body, we typically award this to new senators after about 100 hours in the chair, but I think we can agree the Chief Justice has put in his due and then some. The page is delivering the gavel.
Thank you very much.
Of course, there are countless Senate professionals whose efforts were essential. I'll have more thorough thanks to offer next week to all of those teams, from the Secretary of the Senate's office to the parliamentarians, to the Sergeant at Arms team, and beyond. But there are two more groups I'd like to single out now. First, the two different classes of Senate pages who participated in this trial. Their footwork and cool under pressure literally kept the floor running. Our current class came on board right in the middle of the third presidential impeachment trial in American history and quickly found themselves hand-delivering 180 question cards from senators' desk to the dais. No pressure, right, guys? So thank you all very much for your good work. And second, the fine men and women of the Capitol Police, we know that the safety of our democracy literally rests in their hands every single day. But the heightened measures surrounding the trial meant even more hours and even more work and even more vigilance. Thank you all very much for your service to this body and to the country.
The chair recognizes the Democratic leader.
I join the Republican leader in thanking the personnel who aided the Senate over the past several weeks. Capitol Police do an outstanding job day in, day out to protect the members of this chamber, their staffs, the press, and everyone who works in and visits this Capitol. They were asked to work extra shifts and in greater numbers to provide additional security over the past 3 weeks. Thank you to every one of them. I, too, would like to thank those wonderful pages. I so much enjoyed you with your serious faces walking down right here and giving the Chief Justice our questions. As the leader noted, the new class of pages started midway in this impeachment trial. When you take a new job, you're usually given a few days to take stock of things, get up to speed. This class was given no such leeway, but they stepped right in, didn't miss a beat, ferrying hundreds of questions from U.S. senators to the Chief Justice on national television is not how most of us spend our first week at work. But they did it with aplomb. I'd also like to extend my personal thank you to David Houck, the Director of the Office of Accessibility Services, Tyler Pumphrey, the Supervisor, and Grace Ridgway, the wonderful Director of Capitol Facilities. Everyone Grace's team worked so hard to make sure we were ready for impeachment. Gary Richardson, known affectionately to us as Tiny, the chief chamber attendant, Jim Hoover, and the cabinet shop, who built new cabinets to deprive us of the use of our electronics and flip phones during the trial. Brenda Bird, one. Brenda Bird and her team did a spectacular job of keeping the Capitol clean, and Lyden Webb and his team moved the furniture and then moved it again and again and again. Grace, we appreciate all your hard work. Please convey our sincerest thanks to your staff. Thank you all, the whole staff, for your diligent work through many long days and late nights during this very trying time in our nation's history.
Mr. Chief Justice.
And the chair also wishes to make a very brief statement. I would like to begin by thanking the majority leader and the Democratic leader for their support as I attempted to carry out ill-defined responsibilities in an unfamiliar setting. They ensured that I had the wise counsel of the Senate itself through its secretary and her legislative staff. I am especially grateful to the parliamentarian and her deputy for their unfailing patience and keen insight. I am likewise grateful to the Sergeant at Arms and his staff for the assistance and many courtesies that they extended during my period of required residency. And thank you all for making my presence here as comfortable as possible. As I depart the chamber, I do so with an invitation to visit the court. By long tradition and in memory of the 135 years we sat in this building, we keep the front row of the gallery in our courtroom open for members of Congress who might want to drop by to see an argument or to escape one. I also depart with sincere good wishes as we carry out our common commitment to the Constitution through the distinct roles assigned to us by that charter. You have been generous hosts, and I look forward to seeing you again under happier circumstances. The chair recognizes the majority leader.
I move that the Senate, sitting as a court of impeachment on the articles against Donald John Trump, adjourn, sine die.
Without objection, the motion is agreed to. The Senate, sitting as a court of impeachment, stands adjourned, sine die.
And there it is. President Trump has been acquitted. The Senate requires a 2/3 supermajority vote to remove a president. And in this case, majorities voted to acquit President Trump of both articles of impeachment. A big historical moment. This has only happened 3 other times, one in 1868, one time in the late 90s, 1999, and today. A president has been acquitted and will not be removed from office. Wolf?
To 52-48 on abuse of power. The Mitt Romney.
And our reporting from our colleague Hallie Jackson has this as their worst case scenario. The White House woke up this morning hoping that Joe Manchin would with Republicans. They ended up with a completely unified Democratic Party on the question of conviction and removal from office, and a Republican vote on the abuse of power article of impeachment.
Lindsey Graham a week ago promised a bipartisan acquittal.
Right. I think his accommodations may be downgraded at Mar-a-Lago after not delivering that for Donald Trump, his patron. I think the other thing that's going to happen is that the facts are going to kick these Republicans in the teeth, other than Mitt Romney, over and over and over again. In 5 weeks, John Bolton's book comes out, which will show the public, the 75% of Americans who were enthusiastic about witnesses as part of this trial, exactly what John Bolton would have sat in that chair and testified to.
John Meacham has been watching and listening with us, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, as we watch the Chief Justice exit the Senate chamber and eventually, to his great relief, exit the building and go back to work across the street. John, the question we so often ask you, what just happened?
Well, it wasn't the end. In some ways, it's a beginning. It's at least a middle chapter in America in the age of Trump. The articles have failed, but what we saw last night and what I suspect we will see shortly, and we will see again and again and again on the campaign trail and from the White House itself, is an unfolding presidential campaign by the incumbent president of the United States to turn out his base of support and to treat the union itself not as a political entity to be led, but as an audience to be entertained and engaged. And I think that there's this split screen, we've used that term a lot, between the functioning of the Constitution, the ordinary majesty, however imperfect, of the government, and the way the president has chosen to conduct his political public life. Those two will never intersect. It's a kind of parallel play in the life of the Republic, except that it's not play. It's our reality. And I think that there will be about 4 or 5 documents that should be studied going forward. Congressman Schiff's closing argument, Senator Romney's speech, Senator Schumer's speech today, which I thought was quite remarkable, and Leader McConnell's, because those are very different views of the same reality. And I think what Schiff and Romney and Schumer did is they laid out the importance of this moment in not only historical context, but in the unfolding context of the durability of a constitutional order that's based on both divided sovereignty and the rule of reason, that we actually, as Americans, are called to think and then decide, not decide and then think.
No, John, me too, because there's so much to think about. We look at each other like, you go, no, you go, you go.
Last night, after the speech was over on this network, John said about the State of the Union, it was less about the Union than it was the state of mind of the president and the state of the presidency. Claire, as you know better than most, we just heard 100 votes each on 2 articles. They all must go home, live with that vote, run on that vote, defend that vote. Easier for some than others.
Yeah, Mitt Romney is going to get all the attention for his courageous stand, but let's not forget the Democrats who took a very courageous stand. Joe Manchin's state voted for Donald Trump by 40 points. Doug Jones from Alabama, they carried Donald Trump by 30 points. John Tester from Montana, he carried Montana by 20 points. Even Kirsten Sinema from Arizona, where Trump carried it by 3 points. There's 4 Democratic United States senators who stood strong against incredible political pressure because of the popularity of Donald Trump in their states. And they need some credit here too. They all 4 have done a brave and courageous thing. And there was a tremendous amount of pressure for them to break with the Democrats and acquit the president. And all of them stood on principle. And I'm very proud of all 4 of them.
But it's not just about how good that makes them look. It makes Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and the Republicans, who actually probably have the inverse, much lower numbers of support for Donald Trump, and they couldn't stare at the same facts that Mitt Romney stared at.
Right, so you can imagine what must be going on inside Susan Collins' head, for example, right now, especially after Mitt Romney took the step he took. He said, no, you can be a Republican and acknowledge the truth of what happened and acknowledge the president's culpability, his guilt. It was very striking during the roll call to hear the senators, instead of ayes and nays, saying guilty, not guilty. That was a striking thing. The other thing that struck me from what we just saw was right at the end, when it was the order that a copy of the verdict be sent to the Secretary of State, another copy to the House of Representatives, it all goes in the permanent record of this nation. And it is striking that this is for keeps. The stain will always be on this presidency. This is the 3rd impeachment trial we have ever had. And it will be studied and restudied. I believe it will look different as more information comes out, perhaps as soon as, March 17th, when the Bolton book comes out. And obviously later, when Trump leaves office and we learn more and more and more, someday the documents will come out. The documents that have been hidden.
They always do.
Yeah, they always do. They always do get out. Meacham is much better at taking a long view than I am. But I'm trying to do so today because I think this really is for history.
I mean, speaking of what's likely to come out, not in historical sweeps of time, but in 5 weeks. I mean, to both of you, Chuck and Mike, I mean, the Bolton testimony that was available to these senators, whether
this is all political, but it's also risky for all these senators who just voted on the president's side as this new information comes out. So we should pause and reflect on the history of today. In the context of impeachment, this is over, but it's not over.
Absolutely not. And Laura Coates, Hillary Clinton just did a tweet as the president's impeachment trial began. Republican senators pledged an oath to defend the Constitution. Today, 52 of them voted to betray that oath, and all of us were entering dangerous territory for our democracy, Hillary Clinton writes. It'll take all of us working together to restore it. So this is not the end of it.
Well, no, and of course the dangerous territory she's speaking of is partly what Mitch McConnell was talking about. He calls it a precedent-breaking impeachment. Now, he meant that to inure to his benefit, but in reality, think about what happens to the next president who will face impeachment, who is not certain that acquittal is on the other side of this entire endeavor. What about the precedent that's been set now for that person who really can't call witnesses, to try to have exculpatory evidence come in, to try to support the argument about there being a benefit of the doubt? And you know, Mitt Romney, it wasn't just that he's a Republican who was gone against
consequence of this. The reason that we're here is that Donald Trump picked up the phone the day after Robert Mueller testified, and he called the Ukrainian president. That's what kickstarts this. And the testimony of Mueller could not have gone any better for Trump. And it was a good day for him. Yet the following day he did that, which put us here. And the president, throughout all of this, all of the disclosures he's gone through, all of the negative press about things he's done, has never seemed to be deterred by any of that.
by an acquittal. I have a question about the body of reporting that you and Maggie have done on the Bolton book. Bolton names names. I mean, Bolton puts other people in the room. Is there any sense that there's anything percolating in terms of the other actors that John Bolton calls out in what we've seen reported in this manuscript?
We reported as much as we could, about this book and what is in it. But I'm not sure how much the book may change, in the sense that if you look at Lamar Alexander's argument, there was enough evidence. I do believe they proved it, but it's not enough. And that may give them some protection.
And Chuck, two questions for you. Number one, would you ever have believed that a statement correctly would be made that after a day of Mueller testimony, that would be so liberating and freeing for the White House as to free up a phone call like that? Number two has to do with prior restraint. The White House's right is akin to the line item veto. They can go on a search and destroy mission looking for classified information. Killing books is something traditionally they've not been allowed to do.
Nor will they be allowed to do that here either, Brian. I mean, the prior restraint rules from the Supreme Court are essentially that there is no prior restraint. You're absolutely right. The White House controls the dissemination of classified information. They can classify something, they can declassify something. But if you're an author and you submit a book for pre-publication review, as you must, if you've held a job like John Bolton, there's also an easy out. I mean, if you're fighting over a paragraph or a sentence or a couple of words, you can just take it out. And so I can't imagine that this publication will actually be held up unless both sides really dig in and the author insists on the language that he originally chose. To your first question, it's surprising. When Bob Mueller testified, first of all, I found it extraordinarily compelling. Maybe it's because I had made the mistake of reading both volumes of the report. And so I didn't need his live testimony as much as some folks who hadn't read the report might have needed it. But I would never feel liberated having had that thing written and disseminated, mostly about the president's behavior, criminal behavior. Nothing in that would have liberated me to make that phone call. That's an astonishing timeline when you think about it.
You know, there's something that strikes me. I mean, the
everyone was looking at to see what they would do. You know, in some ways, you compare what they did to what Mitt Romney did, right? And some of these folks are going to face a pretty tough re-elections. They've got tough Democratic candidates. So within that context, that'll be interesting to watch. And Mitt Romney, listen, we came into this thing thinking that we knew what was going to happen, how these folks would vote. This was a bit of a surprise from Mitt Romney, who has a reputation sometimes of going with his party, sometimes bucking his party, but powerful statement here, wrapping his decision in the language of religion to a party, again, that thinks about religion and where white evangelicals hold a lot of sway. And
if we're wondering what President Trump's response is going to be, you might remember last year somebody created that meme on Twitter of President Trump running for re-election not only in 2024, but 2028, 2032, 24. Like and it goes on forever. There it is. Here it is. And this is what President Trump just tweeted again the moment that he's acquitted. He's retweeting this meme, tweeting this meme of President Trump not only winning re-election in 2024, but forever, Trumpism forever. Right. So if anybody would think that he's been chastened or humbled, but at being the only the third president in history and the only one to have had votes for removal that were bipartisan, well, it's quite the
and what does this mean for his behavior, right? Does he?
Well, but
I'm there forever.
You know, there are Republican senators who voted for acquittal because they thought there was no misconduct here, that the phone call was perfect or close to it. And that, to me, is an intellectually honest position. What really amazes me is the John Thunes, the Susan Collins, who say, the president has learned his lesson.
Yeah.
No, he has not. No, he has not. He is going to do this again. He said he will do it again. And the idea that there is some chastening here is absurd.
Well, certainly his Twitter feed would suggest that you're right, Jeffrey. President Trump has now been acquitted by the U.S. Senate on both articles of impeachment, both on abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. We're going to squeeze in a quick break, much more when we come back.
To do with his inability just to brush it off and say, oh, it's politics, it would be politically bad for me to go against Trump. Why should I do that? He's going to get acquitted anyhow. He had made a solemn oath, and he took that very seriously, and that's a rare thing.
And if I
it's a rare thing.
Garrett Haake, who came to know him, said that it was central to his life.
And to who he was.
A lot of the other 99 insist that faith is central to their lives.
Right.
They were not so burdened.
Costs too much.
The reclining chairs, if I ever do go to the movies.
People. And I think Senator Romney has been largely supportive of most everything we've tried to accomplish. Yeah.
Why is there this reluctance to engage specifically?
All right, Mitch McConnell wrapping things up there in his news conference. In the beginning, he talked about Nancy Pelosi, how they've known and worked together for such a long time. He said that he believed that she went against her good political instincts in this situation, pursuing this impeachment, and that then she tried to rush it over to their chamber, pointing out what he sees as the political errors along the way that led to perhaps what we saw in this vote today, Brett.
We were wondering whether we would hear from the president today. We don't know, haven't heard anything specifically, but we just have seen a tweet in which the president tweeted a link to it looks like an ad, but it's Trump 2020, 2024, 2028, and goes on to Trump 28.
Into infinity.
Into infinity. So that's the first reaction we have from the president of the United States to getting acquitted and to staying in office. Very quickly, a final thought, Chris.
Well, that does raise the one question, which is, can President Trump stand success? We've seen how tough and resilient he is in dealing with difficulty, but remember, the call to President Zelensky on July 25th was 24 hours after basically the whole Mueller case fell apart, so we'll have to wait and see how he does with success. You know, they say history is written by the winners. You saw Mitch McConnell. He says the president is at his highest rating ever. True, in the Gallup poll, he says all the Republican senators seeking re-election are in better shape than they were before impeachment. And he said for Nancy Pelosi, she was right in the first case. Don't bring impeachment if there's not bipartisan sentiment, and it was a colossal mistake. That's probably the verdict as of today.
Byron?
Well, the question is what Democrats do next. I mean, they put so much faith in using investigations as the president. They spent 2 years hoping that the Russia investigation would result in an impeachment, only to see it fizzle out last summer. And a lot of Republicans breathed a sigh of
his approval ratings as high as they've been in his presidency. It is the first time the Republican Party in general has had majority approval in a really long time. So
we'll
Thank
see.
you. Thank you, panel. So that concludes our special coverage of the Senate impeachment trial vote. I will see you tonight on The Story at 7 p.m. Eastern.
And I will have you covered at 6.
Acquittal.
Yes.
I'm sure the president will take a few victory laps on that one.
Check your Twitter, and there's the Senate floor. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Bulls and Bears starts right now.
And around the world, I'm Wolf Blitzer, your room, and we're following breaking news. The U.S. Senate has just voted to acquit President Trump of the 2 articles of impeachment passed by the House of Representatives.
The last one before Donald Trump. Senator Mitt Romney joined with all 45 Democrats and the 2 independents who vote with the Democrats, and all of them voted to convict the president on the first article, a bipartisan vote of conviction. Now, the abuse of power charge needed 67 votes to actually remove the president from office, and 52 voted to acquit. A majority voted to acquit. Now, all 45 Democratic senators and the 2 independents did vote to convict the president on the second.
Correspondent Phil Mattingly is joining us. Phil, the trial is now over. History has been done as far as this trial is concerned, and the President of the United States remains in office.
Wolf, that's exactly right. A divisive chapter in U.S. history has come to a close. One in a Senate trial that ripped at the binds not just of this institution.
Says that since the president's campaign only got bigger and stronger as a result of this nonsense, this impeachment hoax will go down as the worst miscalculation in American political history. I think the big news here is that in the not guilty column, Senator Mitt Romney voted guilty on the abuse of power, Article 1. He says that his justification for that is that the president committed a destructive act against his oath of office. Here's his defense. Listen.
It's going to get very lonely. And again, the consequences are significant. They're enough that it made this a very difficult process for me. There has not been a morning since this process began that I slept beyond 4 a.m. I have studied. I have looked at the testimony in detail. I have attempted to get every piece of information I could.
And he may find himself on an island in the Republicans. I don't think he's going to find a lot of Democratic friends as a result of this either. Now, the bottom line for Senator John Cornyn is that Democrats could not beat him at the ballot box, so this is what they tried to do to President Trump.
Impeachment is a profoundly serious matter that must be handled as such. It cannot become the Hail Mary pass of a party to remove a president, effectively nullifying an election and interfering in the next.
Now, from here, moving on, Representative Jerry Nadler has hinted today that he may subpoena John Bolton in front of his committee, Democratic House managers, not letting this go just yet. Back to you.
All right, Edward, thank you very much. Let's bring in our panel. We have Steve Moore, John Burnett, Liz Peek, and Zachary Karabell. So let me go first to you. The Romney decision, first of all. It's not purely partisan anymore. It was when it was in the House, when it came over to the Senate. Now there is one vote by one Republican
for conviction. Does that make any difference?
I don't think it makes much difference. Look, Mitt Romney is considered by conservatives barely a Republican. Many people think he's had a grudge against this president ever since there was this dalliance about him becoming Secretary of State. So I don't think this is going to have much impact, except on Mitt Romney's approval ratings, which are already sinking like a stone, and which are actually worse in his home state than President Trump's are.
By the way, do you think it was vindictiveness on Romney's part
I don't
because he
know.
wasn't appointed, or was it something
know,
he felt in his heart, as he told Chris Wallace?
I will not question someone's religious faith, which he drew on to make this decision, or so he says. I do think it was a statement, and look, I think Mitt Romney is furious that he didn't win in 2012, and someone he thinks much less capable did in 2016.
Yeah, Liz, I agree. Look, jealousy is a very ugly thing, right? And Mitt Romney is just so jealous that Donald Trump is in the White House and that he is not. By the way, I caught some political friends in Utah, and they're talking about a recall of Mitt Romney. I mean, there's incredible anger in that state. The other thing that surprised me about that vote, David, was two of those Democrats, Manchin of West Virginia, who I think
already, because of the vote cast by Mitt Romney, Republicans are sounding off, including the president's own son, Donald Trump Jr. We can put this tweet up on screen. There are some in the Republican Party who are vowing retaliation. Mitt Romney is forever bitter that he will never be POTUS. Donald Trump Jr. tweeted he was too weak to beat the Democrats. Then he's joining them now. He's now officially a member of the resistance and should be expelled from the GOP. That from the president's son, Don Jr. The other thing we should point out is that the White House was caught off guard by Mitt Romney's decision earlier today. It was announced as the president was welcoming the Venezuelan opposition leader, Juan Guaido, over here at the White House. Wolf, we were supposed to go inside the Oval Office for a photo opportunity with the president. At that very moment, it was called off. The White House insisted it was not because of Senator Romney's decision to vote to convict the president on one of those articles of impeachment. But Wolf, one of the things that Mitt Romney did today, besides showing to many Americans that this was a profile in courage and that there's still room for mavericks here in Washington, he did rob the Republicans, did rob the president of a key talking point. They have been saying all along that this was a partisan impeachment exercise. That is obviously no longer the case, given what Mitt Romney did today. Wolf.
All right, Jim Acosta at the White House. Thank you very much. Let's get some more on all the breaking news right now. Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island is joining us. He's a member of the Judiciary Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us.
2 points in 2016. Manchin himself is also friendly with President Trump. Manchin is a likable guy. He likes to be liked. Every time I go to West Virginia, I mean, you go to most places and you ask, right? I mean, most people don't know who their senator. Yeah, most people don't know who their senator is. But every time I go to West Virginia, they not only know him by name, they not only know that he's their senator, they also know him personally, right? So he's the kind of guy who makes these personal connections with people.
A while ago, I wanted to open up my door and look outside because I thought that I had heard a clunder of thunder because of it raining. And I still believe that I heard a clunder of thunder just about the time that the verdict come down towards a fake acquittal to the United States president. And the reason why that I say a fake acquittal is because without proper due in a trial, it is not considered a trial. It is considered a show. Or better yet, it is considered a cover-up. Just as of today, speaking to another individual at the YMCA, expressing our feelings about all of this. Donald Trump made an excellent speech last night. I putting his intent of what he was doing, though it was obscure from what the address should have been about, on a category of a 8, 10 being the highest, 0 being the worst. Because he was using human factors of throwing that in front of our faces to the point that we had to go along with various things that either was happening or had happened, to applaud the congratulations of the accomplishments of the things that he was pointing out for us to look at last night during the address. We already knew basically what the end outcome was going to be in regards to them putting on this showboating, this acquittal to President Trump. But just because he has been acquitted by the Senate in a fake acquittal does not mean that God the Father and the souls of them who helped to establish this great nation pertaining to our forefathers and our builders does not mean that they have acquitted Donald J. Trump. There was a purpose that our ancestors put in place, our builders, our forefathers, of an impeachment, just in case something like this occurred. I personally believe that the senators knew that if they would have brought an onslaught of all these witnesses into the American people's lives, that the American people would have looked not only at the Republican parties of being corrupt, but also the Democrat parties of how that they go in and they're supposed to be working for we the people. They're supposed to be concerned about our well-being. But instead, they go in and do whatever that they want to do. And ultimately, in the end, they get rewarded handsomely for being at the right place at the right time, dealing with international as well as domestic affairs. We have known this has been going on now for quite some time. There is a reason why that we are $23 trillion in debt and having the problems that we're having right now based around corruption. Corruption to be just as disdainful on one party as it is another. This is one of the saddest days that I personally believe has befallen upon to the American people pertaining to this particular event that has costed the American people, give or take, right around $40 million, that has turned into nothing more than just an open fiasco. Just a show. A mere show. It has been one of the saddest moments, because now it's not just one person, but a whole group of people that was involved in a cover-up towards covering up what, in fact, the Republican Party acknowledged that did occur. Sad. Sad that anybody would have taken that upon to himself to have penalized or punished one of our allies on his own personal benefit. Just a while ago, I come through the bottoms, coming between Sedonia and Kenton, Tennessee. And I've noticed, probably for the past week, of this dog that somebody had dropped off, turning it into a stray dog, and it was probably somebody's pet, and because of whatever reason, they decided to dump the dog off. Rather than euthanize the dog, they throw a domesticated animal out into a wildlife refuge area, knowing that it's just a matter of time before the coyotes and the wolves will use it for a tantalizing delicacy. But I question God coming through the bottoms once more a while ago, that the animal was still on its feet and it was still moving around. Keep in mind, I'm out here in the middle of the sticks. I'm in a area that don't believe in animal cruelty like they do out in California and Oregon, Illinois, and other parts of the world, other parts of the country here in the great nation of the United States. And people out here are not only cruel to their animals, but they're cruel to themselves. They abuse their cars. They abuse one another. They abuse their animals in different formats. And I'm not saying all. But by and large, this is a second or third rank area in comparison to Florida, California, and other parts of the country whenever it comes to animal rights. So I'm driving back through the bottoms, coming home from going to the Y, and I see this animal out there again as I'm going over the bridges. And I'm thinking to myself, why hasn't that animal already been consumed or eaten or something? And God spoke to my heart and said, because, Dennis, it hadn't become weak enough yet. The thirsty animals that knows that it is an imposter out there in that particular area are waiting for that particular dog to get weak. And once it gets weak enough, then is whenever they'll move in for the final kill of attacking their prey. And as God was speaking to my heart as I was driving over this bridge, and I was thinking to myself, how sad pertaining to the laws of nature in regards to the ecosystem of how one thing survives upon to another thing, and another thing survives upon to another thing, beginning with the biggest of the big all the way down to the little ant that crawls around in the dirt. And God said to my heart, he said, the same thing happens to the evil humanity side of life. That a lot of times people will wait for the right appropriate time before they'll actually move in for the kill. The $64,000 question, or the $1 million question, still stands in the balances about Mr. Donald J. Trump. Within minutes after it was official that the Senate had voted to acquit President Trump, one of the first things that he puts out on Twitter was him not only being the president during these months and during these years, but he went on to say that he was going to become the president basically forever. And one in the Senate said, well, maybe he'll learn his lesson because of what has occurred here that has costed the American people $40 million, give or take around $40 million, and all this embarrassing time and energy that now has been devoted around this decision making. It's pretty obvious that Donald J. Trump, the current president of the United States, has not learned any type of a lesson pertaining to his arrogance and pertaining to this wild type, bizarre behavior. That now, since the Senate has done what they have done, is basically throwing gasoline onto the fire, that instead of the fire going out or the flames becoming smaller. That was thunder. I heard it thunder just then. The flames will now intensify towards an act of dereliction of duty. Dereliction of duty has now been added to the event of not just of a president that should have been rightfully kicked out of his position, but now we have dereliction of duty on the same type of scenario that happened right here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, of David, my brother, Danny, my older brother, and James Robert Jackson, my father, tried desperately again and again and again and again and again, way before I ever come back to Tennessee in 2014, to try to resolve the problems that was going on out here pertaining to the Ridgway family and the Sheffield family versus the Jackson family, kind of like the Hatfields and McCoys. And of course, every time that it would go before the courts, and the courts basically, sometimes they would slap them on the back of the hand, and other times they wouldn't even get a slap on the back of the hand, was only adding insult to misery as far as throwing gasoline on the fire. And that's what had intensified these events, these attacks, that was not only occurring with the Ridgway family, but it was occurring with several different families around in this local neighborhood, towards thinking that they could come out here, cuss, rat, rave, vandalize, throw stuff in the yard, throw stuff against the building, and basically use our family as an open public whipping post. That every time we went before the judicial system, and the judicial system pardoned that type of behavior, all it was doing was adding insult to misery, just like throwing gasoline up onto a fire. And that's exactly what the Senate just got through doing to Donald J. Trump. Rather than calming him down and making him act more presidential and more professional, rather than calming him down towards chastising him or reprimanding him, they basically just gave him a green light and said, "Go get it, boy. You're doing a fine job, and continue on doing what you're doing. Because ain't nobody going to punish you, ain't nobody going to reprimand you, and you can do as you wish." Whenever it comes to the laws of this land that can act in such of an inappropriate way without seeing true justice being performed between the human society, between one human against another human, especially those who are in charge in their dereliction of duty actions. That's when God steps in. And then God brings justice to either on a personal level or a group type level or a massive level, in the degree that God himself will bring justice into that society. And we have seen this again and again and again, regardless whether it was Sodom and Gomorrah, or we have a tendency of forgetting what has happened with other cultures, other societies that basically got wiped completely off the map, either through war, disease, famine, hurricanes, earthquakes, or some other bad catastrophe that happened to that group of people. So basically, what your Senate just done, they just officially gave God the Father, the one that creates the thunder, the one that creates the rain, the one that has the ability to protect us or the ability not to protect us. What they have just done is give God the green light. The green light. In saying, okay, if you're going to act like a bunch of heathens, I'm going to treat you like a bunch of heathens. The protection that I originally had hedged around the American people and the American people's lives, I will withhold that protection and tell Lucifer, Satan, the wicked, demonic, antichrist spirit, I will tell him, come here, buddy. Sick 'em. And Satan will have a heyday up on this land like we have never seen before, pertaining to robberies, murders, rapes, incest, divorces, death, disease, and possibly even war. From famines to floods to fires to hurricanes to tornadoes, etc., etc., etc. Because if you continue to bite the hand that is feeding you, pertaining to bringing pleasant elements into one's life, what God will do, He will stop feeding you the pleasant elements, and He will allow for the unpleasant elements to come into either that individual's life, or that group of people's life, or that massive, the same way that is going on right now over in other parts of the country, with all this horror and all this misery and all this sorrow that has befallen upon to a group of people. When the Bible says that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, we are not to question the Lord in His abilities towards what He either can do or cannot do in the regards of justice. And whenever the Heavenly Father gets enough of whatever's going on, it won't be no second guessing towards it was intervention, spiritual, divine intervention that had occurred towards straightening out a mess of that culture or that generation of people that was acting in such of a foolish, deprived, ignorant, unjust, ungraceful, immoral way. Since the events happened out here, I have seen the hand of God working in bringing despair, agony, and yes, even death into individuals' lives that was a part of this fiasco that was going on out here in Weakley County and Obion County on a individual level just within the past few years. And I guarantee you, before it's over with, I am going to see even more justifications happening through the evangelical spiritual world of what has occurred here, pertaining to how that all these churches have blackballed Juby because they did not like Juby's message. Well, you know what? I don't like a lot of things neither. But there comes a time that you must grow up. And if it's God's divine will for something to occur, the Bible says that it would have been easier for all of heaven and for all of earth to pass than for one jot or for one tittle of the word thy God to fail. If these doings that I've been a part of for the past 30 plus years has been simply because of my doings, something that I have manufactured, something that I chose to bring into an existence, out of all the ill-mannered particulars that has happened in my life, God would have done already found favor in the other parties towards taking me out rather than sparing my life and keeping that hedge around me. That's the part that the barbarian, the heathen, the lukewarm Christians, that's the part that the reprobates or the blasphemers around in this area don't understand. That this has never been about the individual that's talking to you right now, but it's always been about the kingdom and about the Heavenly Father and about the Lord Jesus Christ. In His fairness, not in man's fairness, not in Tommy Moore's fairness up in Weakley County, or Tommy Thompson's, or Judge so-and-so, or the prosecutors throughout either Northwest Tennessee, or up in Kentucky, or over in Oklahoma. You know, I just got through scanning a while ago various things that has come up just since I have stood for the truth out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, which was in 2009, give or take about 10 years ago. Now going on 11, 12 years now, which we're coming up on the 25th anniversary. And I got to looking at all the stuff that had been talked about since 2009, openly about the Oklahoma incident, which was one of the worst incidences, homegrown incidences, that has ever befallen up onto the USA. And I was literally overwhelmed about various articles that various news agencies has talked about, and how that this one created this documentary, and this one created that documentary, and this is being said about that, and that is being said about this, to the extent of actually trying to make a movie in regard to what actually went on out there on the 25th anniversary coming up. And you know, if that's what it takes for a whistleblower such as myself to stick his or her neck out, to see that true justice does occur, then so be it. They can blackball me all they want. They can target me. They can use my family as a whipping post at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. All they want. Because ultimately, this life that I'm living is only a vapor. in comparison to reality of forever and forever and forever, pertaining to God's reality. And if it means me being persecuted, used, depleted, demonized, dehumanized by this neighborhood, then so be it. Let the record show that this is what has occurred. Just like let the record show this is what has occurred with the 45th President of the United States towards the Senate voting to acquit President Trump. And as I have said, just because the Senate voted to do this does not mean that God the Father has voted to do this. The truth will prevail. That's what the Bible says. The truth will prevail, regardless whether it be in the Oklahoma bombing, the Mount Carmel Waco incident that happened in 1993, the cover-up that occurred during the 9 tapes that wound up going to the White House in 1980 and 8 during Ronald Reagan's administration. The proof will prevail. God's will be done. No matter if 100 senators wants to vote this way or not, this does not matter. And it may matter right now presently, and people may look at this, and Donald Trump may be able to use his inadequate, insensitive, humorous, unprofessional ways of still advancing his immaturity to the rest of the country. But I guarantee you, eventually, there will be an end to Donald John Trump, Donald J. Trump. There will be an end to his presidency. There will be an end to him ruling over the American people in this lifetime. And if he was so corrupt and unjust in this lifetime, do you really think that God the Father is going to allow for him to rule and reign in the lifetime to come, whenever people will be given out positions in heaven, that we will be able to rule and reign with Christ for 1,000 years during the 1,000-year millennium reign? I don't think so. God allows for just and unjust leaders to rise and fall at his own accord. And like I told you all ago, according to the Bible, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And he who laughs last, which will be God, will be the one that gets the best laugh in regards to how Satan, the devil, Lucifer, has deceived, manipulated, and brought hardship to the human race upon this planet. As we intensify towards watching global crisis, environmental crises steadily increasing, as we see the disease spreading over in China to the degree of them having to shut down basically their whole way of life, we will see God's will be done. And eventually there will be a remnant of people that will rectify themselves with the holy, righteous God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And there will be a remnant of people pertaining to the meek inheriting this earth before the end of the ages. This is one of the biggest stains that has ever occurred into the American government, that literally brings tears to my eyes to know what has just happened. Just like it brought tears to my eyes whenever my brother and I fought tooth and nail towards trying to see justice vindicate itself out here on this property. And instead, we seen a group of immoral barbarians acting in such of a heathenistic, ungodly, insensitive way. Is Donald Trump waiting for that special moment just to be able to seize the right opportunity after his prey, or after he thinks that his prey has become weakened to the point that he can pounce and basically do whatever that he wants to do, just like he has made boast comments before that he could basically do whatever that he wanted to do on, what was it, 23rd Avenue or 22nd Avenue or somewhere up there in New York City off of a common known street, pretty close to Times Square, probably pretty close to where Donald Trump has his Trump Tower, at the address of 666 something up there. I don't know what the street is, but Donald Trump is actually pushing the envelope all the way to the edge. And is he waiting for the opportunity to the point that the prey becomes the weakest, and that's whenever he'll do his pouncing? Just like the little dog down here that somebody throwed out to be at the mercy of the hands of the wildness that goes on down here on the Hop-In Wildlife Refuge. This is so sad to see a crisis that we think is over, and this is far from being over. At least President Bill Clinton admitted to his fault. For a good man can make a mistake, but it takes a better one to admit it. Bill Clinton was that better man towards admitting that he had made an error pertaining to Monica Lewinsky, which gave the union a reason to want to pardon him, to say, okay, you've come clean. You've done the right thing. You told us the truth. You finally acknowledged to the American people and to us that what you was engaged in was wrong. The Bible says you have not because you ask not. How can you ask to be forgiven or for a pardon if you've never acknowledged that you've done wrong to begin with? That's where this all stands, of this unjust move, and that now the Senate is going to be corrupted from this moment on of dereliction of duty, of not performing the way that they should have performed. And now the burden will fall upon to the people as far as the righteousness of God in some form or fashion. Mark my words. This will not go undone in the eyes of the Heavenly Father. It is so sad. God.
A big catalyst for this.
She certainly knew what direction she was going. Look, we often talk about 3 tickets out of But you do know this. The one thing we did see today, Pete Buttigieg is more confident. Bernie Sanders is hoping New Hampshire is going to support him as it did 4 years ago. Joe Biden understands the problem he has. Yeah. He went after Bernie.
Now see, they're already in a constant roll, okay? And this is the way the media does on world stage. It's in constant form, constant motion. It'll roll. It'll roll. It'll roll. It'll roll. In other words, once we get that out of the way, let's go to the next event. Once we get that out of the way, let's go to the next event. Once we get that out of the way, let's go to the next event. Rolls, rolls, rolls. In other words, the Senate has already made history today. Now let's get that off the table and let's go back to these ideals. Constant motion, moving, 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 moving. My question is, where are we moving to? I've always used the analogy. It's kind of like a mountain climber going up a mountain. And every time he or she thinks that they've got a good footing, a good toehold, instead of going up the mountain, they're sliding down the mountain. And they'll slide down 3 or 4 or 5 foot, maybe 6 foot, and they'll finally grab a hold of a twig, a root. They'll think that they got a footing again, and then the next thing you know, they'll slip down another 2 or 3 foot, maybe 6 foot, maybe 10, 12 foot, and they'll finally grab a hold of something else. We're heading in the wrong direction towards peace and prosperity as far as a utopia that the Bible talks about. We're heading in the opposite direction towards those events with all these occurrences that keep happening. I don't know what it's going to take. Only God knows what it's going to take to turn it around towards seeing a massive revival, a revolution occur here upon to this planet. But whatever it's going to take, I guarantee you this. It's just like the Walmart slogan. It's coming near a neighborhood near you. Because if that's what it's going to take to make it occur or to make it happen, to bring forth this type of peace and utopia that the Bible talks about, between then and now, or now and then, whichever way you want to look at it, God knows what it's going to take to get it back in line. God knows what it's going to take to put us back up on top of the mountain. Right now, we're going in the wrong direction. We're sliding down the mountain. My question is, what is it going to look like once we finally get down to the bottom of a 23 trillion, 2.3 million incarcerated prisoners or jailmates in jail? These are all unjust man's doings that are occurring. And whenever these events occur on the same level of what went on in Noah's era and what went on in Sodom and Gomorrah's era, that's whenever you have to worry about the man upstairs stepping in and saying, enough is enough. And I'm just afraid that what the Senate just done today gave the green light in more ways than what our little finite minds could ever think of what is going to occur within the next few days, within the next few weeks, within the next few months, and within the next few years in the regards towards seeing true justice be done. His will be done. Not our will. Not the Senate's will. Not the House's will. Not Donald Trump's will. Not even my will. But his will be done. Good luck to all of us. And we can't say it enough. Shalom. And may God bless America and have mercy upon us all. Thank you for listening. And
going to work when it comes to Democrats who feel like the party has
Shalom.
gone far too left for their liking when it comes to issues like healthcare and other economic factors.
You know, one other factor, Jesse? Biden's low on cash right now.
Yeah.
Very low. So he's got to do a lot of fundraising. I don't know. What do you think when you hear people who are dyed-in-the-wool Democrats say that Sanders...
See, this is all political circuit evolving our political officials that's tied right in with the media. And if they can't get the media to fund the mainstream commercials, the mainstream media, well, then they start looking at it being faltery as far as, oh, they'll never be able to pull that off. Why? Well, we're not working for free. We're not putting this on our airwaves for nothing. So the whole thing that Donald Trump originally started talking about as far as it being tainted, as far as it being rigged, it really is. And it's all rigged around the rich man protecting the rich man. Naturally, they was going to vote the way that they was going to vote today with Donald Trump. They're not going to turn on one of their own. Did you really think that they was going to turn on one of their own? Donald Trump's supposed to have all this power and all this money? Do you really think that they was going to consume or eat one of their own? Now, somebody like me, or somebody like, I'm just going to use this for an analogy, Jimmy Swaggart. Oh, they'll turn on them in a heartbeat because we're not part of them. We're not part of that corrupt system. The corrupt system that even the media has tied off into. So whatever is in the cards for it to befallen, today officially just gave the green light. And may God have mercy on our souls. Lord, Lord, Lord.